Welcome to another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm-Up Sessions podcast. This is episode 136, I believe, which is quite the number.
Dude, it's a lot.
And it keeps climbing slowly but surely.
The higher it climbs, the more intimidated I get.
I know, yeah.
There's way too much information out there on some of the stupidest things I've said.
Same. AI can he's going to do some damage at some point. So
much for me being a politician, dude. Done.
Today on this episode, we're going to go over kind of the relationships between like a roaster, us, and cafes that buy our coffee, serve our coffee behind bar. What does that look like? How do we help make their lives easier? How do they make our lives easier? And vice versa, because at the end of the day, this isn't just, I don't think this is just about like, how do we push as much coffee out there, even though that is great for business wise, but I think there are other things that play a role that are worth considering and talking about.
Right.
And so,
yeah.
Ready to go?
I'm ready to go, dude. I'm rolling. My mind is like
I'm gonna
turning,
swap
dude.
this is yours.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Yours has that
mine's a gray
gunmetal
one.
The gunmetal gray, which I
Sick.
like.
Yeah.
But
Did you know I have another Hasami mug? Like for home use?
I want like 5-10 more.
Wholesale account.
I want the mugs and I want the.
We bring so much value.
Don't they have plates or do they?
They have plates. They have dining room sets.
I'm like, dude, we need them all. All. I don't know what I'd use them for, but all of them.
Nice. That's fine.
I think, I think it's not extraordinary.
Yeah.
But I think the brew's pretty decent, no?
Yeah.
Like
I would say
quality.
Yeah, I'd say it's dialed. Yeah.
What are you picking up on it?
I don't know. There's something that I'm tasting that I don't even know how to describe.
I think there's some peachiness that I'm getting here and there.
Mm-hmm. The classic stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's something else that sometimes when I taste coffee, I like kind of move through the stuff that I already know that is in the cup.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, dude, what's that flavor? Like, what am I tasting right there?
I know. We have some folks that make fun of us because we always say stone fruit. And I think that's naturally, I think when you have like a repertoire of like flavor notes that you use, you usually just, your brain, I think, automatically somehow just recognizes those things and puts two and two together.
Yeah.
Where,
I mean, I'm not going to name drop, but there's one coffee guru influencer on the web who always calls honey. I'm not going to say his name.
I don't even know who, but interesting. But honey is one of those where I'm like,
it's almost everywhere.
But it's a good flavor note.
So is vanilla.
Yeah.
You can almost always call vanilla and you're in the ballpark.
Yeah, I reckon. Yeah. We were just cupping and that stood out to me, and I never called graham cracker. Mm-hmm. But that stood out to me and I was like,
I was accurate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a flavor note that's worth keeping in mind and using a little more often.
I mean, think about what's
not that you can pick and choose.
But think about what a graham cracker tastes like, right? A lot of the time it's honey.
Oh, that's true. I forgot that it is very honey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Honey and I don't know. What's graham? I guess it's like granola? No.
It's granola-ish, but it's not exactly. It's not like nutty and oatmeal like.
Yeah.
It's not like that, but it is grain, like,
Yeah. It's kind of like our baked potatoes, mashed potatoes, and fried potatoes. Do they all taste the same? And French fries.
I mean, they do all taste the same. They all taste like potatoes.
Right.
Yeah.
But
now if you said like regular, like a russet, whatever potato, you compared that to a sweet potato.
Yeah.
And you compared that to a like, I don't know, what's another kind of potato? Are yams and sweet potatoes the same thing? We're going off on a tangent. Yeah. But I need some comments regarding yams and sweet potatoes.
Yes. Folks, down in the comments, drop your favorite kind of potato. We'd love to hear about it. But
Yeah.
yeah, the world of potatoes, it's pretty complex.
It's a complex experience there. Unless
Indeed.
your coffee is tasting like potato defect, then we don't
It's
want
true.
any of that. I've had
True.
some coffees from, I think, Burundi that taste like potatoes.
Yeah.
Not always nice.
Unless you're into that.
I mean, who knows? Maybe.
I mean, if you like a little potato-ness in there, who am I to tell you what to drink? It's up to you.
I guess.
Well,
All right.
folks, speaking of that, we don't leave you guys hanging. This is a Colombian washed, I believe.
Yeah.
Huela, I think, from Prodigal. It's the name of the coffee is Medina. Yeah, solid coffee. I want to say it's like one of Prodigal's best, especially having tried a lot of them.
Can you say
it
you've
works.
had every single Prodigal coffee so far?
No, we're not going down this train. I have not tried every Prodigal coffee. It comes up a little too often here, but yeah. Alrighty. Well, speaking of them, Narrative is serving them.
Yeah.
Which means you're potentially brewing them
A lot.
as well. Speaking of wholesale in general, we also wholesale like Surprise, and I don't think that many
People ask all the time.
Yeah, people
dude.
do ask, like, as weird as it sounds. We also don't really talk about it too often, so it kind of makes sense that people don't know. And so, yeah, a lot of what we do is we literally roast coffee and ship it to people's homes who buy it online. So if you want to pick up some tasty coffees right now, we have a pretty solid menu. Go check it out. But other than that, we also partner with, all kinds of different, businesses, nonprofits, offices, churches, cafes including. So a little bit of everything. And we've had some interesting projects where people have just asked us to, hey, can you just roast a little bit for some kind of like holiday party or whatever it is. But today, mostly we want to just kind of talk a little bit about wholesale cafe specifically. Because I think the cool thing with wholesaling to cafes is not only the fact that we get to sell coffee and let more people enjoy it, but cafes are also like the kind of the face of coffee. Like roasters are not the face of coffee as much as cafes. Yeah. And we even have a lot of people locally who are like, oh, is there a place that we can go to buy your coffee? And I think, and nothing wrong about that, but I think people, like, cafes are still such a, again, like the cover of the magazine for a lot of people where they can experience coffee. So when we get to serve our coffee to somebody who can do a good job of serving their people really well, that actually makes me feel like not only am I serving the cafe really well, but I'm also serving like a lot of the people in a community that I may never have reached, and they get to enjoy really tasty coffee. And a part of being a roaster is also equipping the cafes with the right kinds of goods so that they could also thrive and enjoy the coffees that they're serving. So I'm just going to start it with that. Anything that I said maybe just triggered some thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, one thought came to my mind as I was talking to a cafe owner on Sunday from like a local cafe bakery. And I was kind of like letting him know like, hey, like, we have coffee. And I was thinking like, why would I want my coffee served in this cafe? And one of the reasons is because you and I are regulars there,
Right.
we love that place. So therefore we feel like our coffee would belong there just because we enjoyed that place, not even to say that like we only want to drink our coffee. No, it's because we love the space so much that we would love to have our coffee in that space,
For sure.
And I think that's like also an important thing. Like you brought up Narrative. It's like, why would I love to see Mira at Narrative? It's because it holds a special place in like my life. It holds a special place in my whole coffee career. Like it would be an honor to see our coffee there one day, and it will be. But at the end of the day, I'm like thinking like that's a lot of the times the approach I have when I'm thinking about our coffees being in cafes. Like this is a special experience for us, knowing that our coffee is being represented to the city, to this community, to the state. And it's also hopefully a special place for that cafe or that space to be like, we want to serve mirror. You know, I mean, another thought comes to my mind is when I was in Indo and that cafe served our coffee for like a week in Indonesia. That was very special, again, because I love Indonesia, spent a lot of time there. And then to see a cafe overseas serve mirror, not to me, but to like the local people in that village, in that town, in that city, that means a lot. And that's basically how I approach envisioning every single cafe that sells our coffee or serves.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a very interesting point, is to like taking that aspect of like some places you just want your coffee in.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't even care about anything. I just want our coffee in there just because it's an awesome spot. It's like a beautiful place, or they do service really, really well. Or man, that was, you know, like, for example, that local cafe, like, I love it. I'll go there regardless.
Right.
But to have our coffee in there, man, that would just slap. Just the experience and being part of what they're doing, which I think is a big deal, is like when you can, you know, from our perspective, is like when I can help a cool cafe that aligns with our values, aligns with our, you know, quality metrics and the things that they want to bring to the community. If we can align with that and just say, hey, like, we're just here to like turbocharge what you're doing already, like supercharge your cafe experience. Because at the end of the day, I think that's a really, really big portion of it. Like, as people who are like, they're literally pulling our coffee or some coffee into the cup of their guests that are coming through. And we want to be able to provide something excellent to them because they're already doing something excellent. So like, we're just coming alongside and saying, hey, you're doing cool stuff. We also do cool stuff. Let's do cool stuff together. And I think there's some really awesome stuff that can come as a result of that. And I think it also refers to more of like a partnership than it is like, hey, here's the invoice, pay the invoice, we'll get you goods.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, oh, no, we actually want to bring something good into this world. I mean, our tagline is literally reflect what's good. That's kind of the homage, is like, we think the good coffee belongs in the world. And if we can have more places that serve good coffee, it's great.
Yeah. A part of the idea of like a partnership, what stands out to me is, one, as someone who serves coffee that's been wholesaled from a roasting company, I think one of the major things is like understanding that cafes or cafe owners, cafe managers, logistics matter, right? Whether it's how quickly the coffee gets shipped, how far off a roast date it is, and even things like, you know, shipping costs. Like there were numerous times where it was kind of difficult to get a coffee because of how expensive it was to ship. And, you know, we serve at Narrative, we serve a lot of coffees from, you know, other countries outside of the United States. So shipping and logistics are way different. We've had coffees caught up in customs. And it's like, what do you do when your retail bags got caught up in customs and they're 4 weeks off of roast? Do you still sell them? Do you scrap them? Do you return them? And I think a lot of the times when working with roasting companies, and if a roasting company approaches that space and that mentality of like, okay, like, how can I make sure that this coffee not only tastes good, but this coffee gets to its cafe in a timely manner with good logistics, and even down in the nitty gritty of like, hey, when you open up a shipping box, like I've seen many different shipping boxes from different roasting companies. And sometimes when you open up a shipping box and those bags are destroyed in a shipping box, it's tough. Like, it's like, it's not a problem, right? It's still coffee, but like the fact that now I have to like do a little extra work to make it look nice on the shelf. It's little things like that, right? Even the design of a bag, like, keep in consideration. I think Kyle did a poll, Roselle, like months ago, maybe 6 months ago, about like, you know, hey, cafe owners or people, like, what kind of packaging would you like? And that's a big question for a cafe, because you can get a freaking fantastic coffee, but if it sits on a shelf and no one buys it because not even like, and I'm not talking about poorly designed bags. There's been companies that I worked with that have incredibly designed coffee storage things that sit on shelves that did not sell well.
Yeah.
Because to a degree, it was just not even the appeal. It was just like people didn't get it was coffee.
Yeah.
You know, they thought it was a jewelry box, you know,
Yeah.
and those kind of things really, really matter. So, yeah. And I'm more or less like now diving deep in like these logistical kind of things that you need to approach.
Right. And I think, I mean, a lot of what you said, whether that's shipping, bags, like we've taken into consideration almost all of those things.
Right.
Like, I mean, starting even with our bags, like we were thinking, okay, how's this going to look when somebody gets it in a box at home? When somebody, like, how is this going to feel when, you know, they're brewing it and it's halfway empty? Like, how is this going to be the experience of it sitting on a shelf somewhere? Like a lot of these little things, and although they can maybe not seem significant or big, but it's like, instead of one silver bullet, it's like 100 golden BBs. It's like a bunch of little things working together to create, I think, something that's really impactful and powerful. Yep. And on top of that, I want to touch upon shipping. Is that like, yeah, I think shipping is a big one, because not only is it about freshness, but also if shipping costs are a lot, plus on top of that, you're selling a coffee that's somewhat expensive, that makes it, a little challenging for folks like you, or, folks listening to this who are cafe owners, cafe managers who are doing the buying decision. Man, all of a sudden shipping starts to cost you a lot. Yeah. And then then you have to do a little more work of being like, hey, this is why this pour over costs $10. Right. And it's not a geisha or a Cedra. Yeah. Or, hey, this is why this bag costs a little more. Or even, we've kind of fluctuated with pricing, and we kind of tweak it on the go, because sometimes it's just like you look at the price and you're like, that's how much it should cost, but how is this going to benefit cafe owners? And then we actually sometimes will I don't know if this is probably not like good business practice, but I think putting cafe owners first is really impactful. But like, we'll sometimes lower the cost of some things because we're like, this coffee a little cheaper might cut out into our margins, but it actually makes the cafe owner's life a little easier, because they might be able to sell a cup for a little less, or a shot of espresso for a little less. Let alone that also gives them a little more buffer in like when they sell a bag. Like, I mean, we've talked about like, oh dang, like a cafe that used to serve our coffee, it's like, they're actually making X amount more than we are. Yeah. And thinking about it like, that's okay. Yeah. But then also thinking about how do we even increase it for them on their behalf, so it's a little easier. Like sometimes we've even taken hits on shipping and are like, cool, we barely made anything on that big order, because we thought it would be better to just take a lot of the shipping hit, like, anyways.
Yeah, no, that's everything you said is 100% right on. I think from someone who then receives that coffee on the other end, and getting a coffee that you have to mark up in proportionately to sell on your shelf in your cafe, and knowing that coffee costs more in your cafe than the website kind of stings, Yes. But then at the end of the day, you got to like both sides of, or all of the supply chain needs to make money that creates businesses sustainable. Because if one side goes down, if, a roasting company can't make enough money to be able to sell more coffee than that cafe, no matter how good and tasty your coffee is, they can't sell it because the roasting company isn't using good business practices to make enough money, to make sure that everyone's getting paid, to make sure that coffee's being sent out. So every part of it is important, and then every part of it has to work together. And I think this conversation has happened a lot when we're talking about buying green coffee, right? Yes. And talking Very about valid. Margins from green coffee. I don't hear a lot of conversation about roasting companies thinking about margins that cafes need to make in order to sell their coffee. And Correct. That's very, very important. That's what, when we're talking about partnership, that's kind of what we're defining. Like, we're keeping that in mind, is that you are selling our coffee and you need to make money. We get that. So how can we make this, equally beneficial? Because if you sell more bags of our coffee, then guess what? You're going to buy more bags of our coffee. Yes. That's a win. Yes. So like when Jorge when you talked to Jorge and he cared so much about how our business was doing.
Yes.
Because he knows. Even
Yes.
even if he didn't care, he's a very caring and good
Yes.
and loving person. But even if he didn't care, it would be a business benefit to say, I want to make sure you sell more coffee because you know where you're going to get your green. In the same way that's kind of common sense, but it's also a good way to take care of your partners.
I agree. And I think, on going even a step further is, I think there's like an unlock that happens when you can start thinking about the fact that cafes, when they do better, you're doing better as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it is in your personal interest, not that you should be manipulating somebody to get the extra win, but no, it is in your personal interest as well for them to do good. Like my hope is that coffee from here sells really, really well at, wherever they're sitting on the shelf, but also thinking about it like, what can we do to shine a brighter light onto cafes that are serving our coffee, whether it's as simple as like a really small little post reshare of like, hey, they're serving our coffee.
Exactly.
It's a small little thing, but me personally speaking, like if a local cafe shared that, hey, they're serving one of my favorite coffee roasters, or maybe a coffee roaster I've never tried but I've always wanted to, I would actually benefit, from that, from just being like, oh, they're actually serving our coffee in my little town, so I need to go and get a cup. So it's like even small little things like this are very beneficial. And there are like a few things that I've kind of been thinking about is potentially even starting to invite some of those, our partners onto the podcast to just shine a brighter light. Just say, hey, folks, you guys have been listening to the podcast. If you're in, for example, there's a cafe in Louisiana that's going to serve our coffee here soon. If you're in Louisiana, New Orleans, go swamp the cafe and buy some Mira coffee.
Exactly.
You'll enjoy it. They'll be happy.
Yeah.
Everyone's happy.
Exactly. Oh, that's so good because one, as a cafe manager, that's such a big deal. Because I love the multi-roaster model. I love walking into a cafe, even if is a barista PDX that roasts their own coffee and then serves other people. It's like, I love that. One, it's like, you have a classic, like, whatever they roast is going to work. It's going to be there. But you always have an option to try something new. Then you also may have an option to try something like, let's say when Narrative served Kawa from France, the chances of you finding Kawa in the United States was really, really hard.
Yes.
And then the chances of you even experiencing that coffee, they had some bangers. One of the most expensive coffees that I served was one of the most expensive coffees I've ever served. I think it was like $18.75 a pour over or something like that. Don't quote me on the numbers, but it was from Kawa. And the reality is that wouldn't be possible if my guests didn't know the fact that this coffee is being served in the cafe. So again, like that's the little touch on like marketing and how important it is on both sides of the spectrum that a roasting company is shining a light on the cafe and a cafe shining a light on the roasting company, and it's a partnership. It's a play. Like we all have influence in our little circles or big circles, and it's very, very important that we all do our due diligence.
For sure. Is there anything else that we haven't touched upon that is like for you, even small things that makes your life easier from a cafe standpoint that when a roaster does is like, hey, you just like, it may not be anything big. Like recently I've been thinking about like, we write our dates on our bag and I was thinking like, is it more efficient to put the date on the front side of the bag or the back side of the bag?
Always.
So then you're like turning it and I'm like,
always front.
So talk a little bit about that and then maybe a few other things that we haven't touched upon.
Because you brought that up, big shout out to Velton Ross. I absolutely love, I don't know who does this, Velton or Nate or whoever is working. I absolutely love that. I know that the roast date is on the top of the bag with a black Sharpie because they have this copper, like metallic looking bag. And I love that. There's some roasting companies that have it in fine print on the label. And I always have a hard time like, oh, where's that roast date? Like what bag? You know what I mean? Like I just don't like that.
It's slightly more time consuming, tedious.
Yeah. I just want to look up at the shelf and be like, okay, I want to serve this bag first before that one. That's it. I don't want to take my time making that decision. And that's a very like small thing, right? a little bigger, but in that train of thought is like solubility. That's key. Like I'm not saying like all of your coffees should be developed just to make sure that they're super soluble. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying to have that diversity of maybe like solubility and taking your roast approach to a way, understanding like, hey, we have this coffee that if you're a cafe and you are serving coffee in this manner, this coffee would still taste good. We're not sacrificing on flavor and quality, but this coffee would probably fit your style of service better than this coffee. There were definitely coffees that I've served before that were so difficult to extract on bar in a cafe environment. Would that coffee extract great on, at home on a, Weber, like decent espresso? Sure. Like probably. Would that coffee slap? Probably. Yeah. Does that coffee work in the cafe when you don't have a Moonraker? Like, I mean, that's a stupid example, but you know what I'm talking about? Like, of course. Like you don't want to have all the little gadgets to make sure that your coffee tastes good. So part of that is understanding like, okay, what coffee can you offer to cafes that would actually work well for the cafe? I mean, okay, I keep going on this because it's on my mind. It's like, does the cafe dial in coffee every morning? That's a question. Like if they do, that's great. Like you can offer these coffees. Maybe they dial in once they get a bag and they dial into roast state. A lot of cafes do that. Cool, that's fine. But what coffee can they use to do that? There's definitely been coffees that I'm like, I don't want to serve this coffee again because it's such a pain in the butt to serve.
For sure. What do you think about coffee menu wise and selection wise? Is there something that you're keeping in mind that make your life a little easier of serving your guests, or not really? I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, because Narrative rotates their coffee every day, and we have anywhere from 15 to possibly like 20 different coffees to choose from. Like that's an insane model. Like people just, I mean, this is not a podcast about Narrative, but the example is like when a barista walks in the morning and they get to choose that coffee, that's their choice. And that's a big deal. Like for me, when I come on bar, like the last 2 days that I've been on bar, I literally am like, okay, I want to serve, like today I served a Costa Rican honey and then I served Futura's Panama. Yeah. And again, there's just a little play between the two just based on their flavor profiles because we serve like a tame and a wild, and there's a little bit of play and price, that is a Narrative model, but I also think that's very important. Even if you're a barista in a cafe that doesn't rotate 20 coffees, but rotates a few, is to think about how can you creatively serve guests based on flavor profile of the coffee. Then you could even make it like I sometimes make it really fun. Like we've at one point, this doesn't happen a lot, we've served only Colombian coffees on the whole menu. And you know how big our menu. Our menu can have anywhere from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 5 coffees, and then who knows what's on batch. So 6 different coffees on bar at one time. Served different ways. Right. And to have like a string of Colombian coffees can sometimes be fun because you're like, hey, look at all these flavors you can achieve from just one place of origin or one country of origin.
That's definitely something we think about all the time as a roaster, is making sure that, hey, there's a coffee on our menu that will do well on just espresso. It's not too wild. It's not too out of the ordinary. Of course, I'm not saying it's bland or boring, but I'm saying like it fits inside of a milk drink really, really well and can be enjoyed by a wide variety. That's kind of where our timeless category came from. It's like, hey, these coffees are timeless. They're solid. And that's also why we have like a really solid Guat year round. That's to really cover that. And then we also have coffees that might be a little more pricey or a little more something that, is going to be served on filter, or something that's a little edgy, or if you want like a wild espresso, simply because I think, I don't know, I think as a roaster, being able to offer a wide variety and even be able to suggest like, hey, this is kind of where most cafes sit, is I think that's like a little benefit, because that makes their life easier. Because now they, if they're only carrying one roaster, they don't have to be like, okay, well, for the next 2 months, we won't have a solid, coffee that's going to kill in milk. We don't have to look for another roaster to fill that gap or to fill that hole. Or even like, a decaf. Like for I think first year we didn't have a decaf.
Mm-hmm.
We brought it in because there were some people that wanted a decaf, and it's like, cool, that's an inconvenience if you have to go to another roaster to find
Just
a solid decaf.
Mm-hmm.
How do we cut that friction out of the way and just make your life a little easier? I don't know.
Totally. I mean, who wants to throw like a $20 a pound coffee into a mocha? And is that, is that necessary? Like,
right.
Probably not.
100%.
Like you want to maybe throw a chocolatey coffee into a mocha that's going to go with chocolate. I don't know. At least that's how I feel about it, depending on your chocolate and all of that. But it just doesn't make sense. And you have to take that approach as well as a roasting company to know, man, most cafes probably sell more vanilla lattes than just shots of espresso. Most. I'm not saying all, but there's a lot of cafes that will buy coffee from roasting companies that need something that goes great in a vanilla latte. And that's something to consider. That's something to be aware of. And that is what a partnership looks like, is when you're thinking those things, when you're processing those things, and then when you're approaching your sales tactic, like as much as I hate saying that, if your sales tactic comes from a perspective of partnership and service, then you're not really selling, you're serving, 100%. And we get to serve coffees at X cafes through these people, but we get to serve those coffees, 100%. So when every single time a barista is serving Mirror coffee, we literally feel like we're doing it. We're with you, like, on that. And that's super important for me. And that's what I'm passionate about. Going back to the original example, when I go in and I was talking to that cafe owner, I was like, homie, like, I've been going to this cafe for like 5 years now, like almost every Sunday, unless I'm out of town or something's happening.
I may know your menu as well as you do.
Yeah, I've actually helped you price things on your menu and asked you freaking raise your cappuccino by $2 more, because this is too cheap. Like, you know what I mean? So stuff like that I'm like, man, that's why do I want Mirror there? Because of that.
Yeah. I think one last thing that inspired that thought was also realizing that, like some cafes are not good, so to speak, not good. What am I looking
Partners?
for?
Not good.
That, but no, we're not a good fit.
Yeah.
And being able to say, like, I mean, there have been people that have reached out about samples, and after doing a quick little research, and I usually ask, like, hey, who have you guys been serving for?
Yeah.
And knowing based on what they're serving and what they're looking for, I'm usually like, hey, this is probably the closest we can get.
Yeah.
But we may not be the right price point, flavor profile, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I think that's also a part of just helping them and serving them.
Yeah,
like, I do not want a cafe that doesn't usually sell light roasted, maybe fruity, punchy coffees to bring us on and then be like, what the heck? Why are all my customers not happy?
Exactly.
And it's not because they're not happy because it's not because the coffee sucks. It's just that, hey, you're not supposed to, like, that's not these worlds don't mix,
right. And then knowing that cafe doesn't, serve coffees in this manner that we would help them get a exceptional experience. Like, I wouldn't want a guest picking up Mirror, some random person in, Missouri, like, picks up a bag of Mirror or drinks a shot of espresso of Mirror that wasn't properly served, and they have a bad experience. Now they don't like our coffee, and two, they may never go back to that cafe because of our coffee. That would suck. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, we're not in business of putting cafes out of business. We're in business to make sure cafes flourish. And that's the key. That's the partnership thought.
100%. Well said. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm-Up Sessions podcast. I think this was a really solid killer episode that is just, if you're a roaster, I think this is worth giving it a thought as to how you should be going about, serving your guests. So, thank you once again for listening to another episode. And remember, as we always say, reflect what's good, folks.